So I have had half a year to accept it now, but I can't lie, it still feels weird to me that the Flower Cup of all things consists of a bunch of retro tracks. I understand that because of this game's location-based gimmick, each cup having a certain thematic to it makes sense, and yes, it makes some sense too that the Fire Flower Cup would be the one that best fits the desert theme. With that said, the first cup being all new tracks and the second one being all returning ones feels weird. It's still very new to me, and it feels like they kind of only committed halfway to this new idea, and part of me wishes that this could just be like the Shell Cup or the Lightning Cup instead, if they weren't going to split more cups up in like a 2-2 fashion. It feels weird to me that so many retro tracks have been mostly confined to only 4 cups, and as such, it feels like the majority of them just have a desert, snow, water, or industrial theme. Undeniably though, what we got is great for this video series, because in episode 1, I got to explain how I value new courses, and today I get to explain how I grade the retro tracks. So I'll try to keep this part brief, but let's get into it. First, gameplay is always going to matter above all else. If a track was brought back, I want to know if it took advantage of its new opportunity. Was it implemented well into the new engine, and was it an upgrade over its last showing? This is very important, especially for the second time retro tracks, because if a course is going to be remade multiple times over, I think there typically needs to be new reasons for us to keep being excited about it. At the very least, if a track isn't an upgrade, I will ask if it's still a quality addition that works to balance out the rest of the track roster. Could there have been better choices out there, or does this track specifically fill a need that only it truly could have slotted in for? In the last episode, I said I would look into whether I was happy or not that these new tracks were created. For retro courses, this will not be the case, because had Wario Stadium not returned in this game, it still would have been an eligible track for the next game. So when it comes to retro tracks, I take a bit of a puzzle piece type of approach for sure. And this is also why I care about what tracks are reappearing. Because if a track that has already returned could easily be replaced by another option that has not, I think that's worth critiquing. Up to this point, it has seemed like a guarantee that all the past courses will get their opportunity eventually, and Wario Stadium finally becoming the last N64 track to be remade, I think still proves that this is still a priority to some degree. So as such, tracks that are getting second remakes are already kind of receiving a form of extra credit. So again, I want to make sure that they are especially worth that investment. So what better track to kick off this discussion than the one and only Desert Hills? Since the game has released, I've seen a lot of negative discussion about the track. I've seen a lot of people asking where the actual Desert Hills went. It seems to me that they've been moved to the large open section, but to many, this is still a negative or at the very least underwhelming. To me, I can't say I care that much about the semantics. I feel like all the outrage about Sunset Wilds back in 8 Deluxe mainly stem from the fact that we weren't expecting a gimmick present in Super Circuit to be taken away 2 decades later. Had we never had that sunset to begin with and got the AD version, I'm pretty sure most people would have found the name fitting enough. And even had the name been accurate, I'll just say this. If back in Double Dash, the name of Wario Coliseum was instead Wario Straight Line, I would not have been angry that the track was not actually a straight line. I would just be here telling you 22 years later that Wario Straight Line is still my favorite track in the series. So my point in bringing up this ridiculous hypothetical is just, I am not going to be grading a track based on how well it fits its name. I'm going to grade it on whether or not I think it's fun to play, and that is all that truly matters, and to me, I never saw Desert Hills as something that was above changing up to begin with. In fact, this version of Desert Hills I believe is pretty comfortably my favorite one. This might catch some of you by surprise, especially if you listened to my commentary on the retro track selection before the game came out. But this was not exactly a super high hurdle to clear. Around that time I was dreading the idea of playing the course a bunch. In hindsight, this was probably because I was still looking at it from the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe gameplay standpoint. 8D of course had a lot of pretty generic bagging tracks flooded with off-road cuts everywhere, and after years of dry desert burnout, I wasn't exactly looking forward to running back Desert Hills. But the changes that Mario Kart World made has made these bagging tracks a little bit more interesting in my mind. Believe it or not, I've played a few races on Desert Hills now where I just won by simply trying to stay up front, and that actually has done a lot to increase my enjoyment of a track that I was kind of dreading going into this game. That's also not the only thing that has warmed me up a little bit to the track though. I mean, we've got these guys now too, but mainly the ending feels slightly less dumb than it has previously been. Like, yeah, the big hills are gone, but the hills were kind of just the worst part of the track in my mind. Their presence made using a golden mushroom at the end feel ridiculously overpowered, to the point where front running could feel like a highly questionable strategy, even in a game like Mario Kart Wii that still only had one item slot. and in a game with double item boxes, you just can't tell me that keeping things as is would have been a good idea. Like, yes, it would have been satisfying to carry a star and golden mushroom into the hills on lap 3, and maybe that would release the endorphins in your brain and make you feel happy, but it's all fake. To ride the high of a successful golden up, you need willing bait to voluntarily put themselves in a worse position than you. And when you're playing against competent opponents, something that I think you probably should be doing if you truly want to maximize enjoyment of a multiplayer game, people aren't just going to volunteer to do this for you. But in situations like this, if everybody's playing optimally, it slows the race down. And I find it problematic when the flow of a race slows down to a crawl, because there are better strategy games out there than Mario Kart. To me, I value a mix of speed in these games too. I'm not exactly here to wait. So I appreciate that up to this point, I haven't felt the need to play Desert Hills in that way. And beyond just the flatter ending section, I think part of this is due to players having more options at the end, even without mushrooms in hand. The addition of charge jumping shortcuts allow you to cut off the final turn by landing in the water to the right of the finish line. This section has notoriously been a big final turn shortcut in the past, and now it can set up runners not just for a win, but for future laps with a stone trick ramp leading them back out to the main course. It makes for a much tighter racing line around this section that isn't totally reliant on off-road shortcut usage, and this isn't even the only thing too. If you really want to get fancy, after the hills section you can shroom cut and then charge jump onto some rails up top and grab some coins before lining up for a tight turn, and when adding a feather to the mix, it unlocks some cool potential routes. And with all the new changes, the shroom cut mentioned leading into all of this is the biggest one on the track for sure now, but the other thing I appreciate with it is that taking it makes you skip the final item set. These are the little things that keep tracks with some bagging potential more honest in my opinion, and the balance here is truly not that bad. The lightning bolt doesn't always appear to begin with, and when it doesn't always dictate the results as much as I would have initially expected. Now, of course, it should be mentioned that this is still a pretty generic desert track, and this is not the first or second rodeo for Desert Hills either. I said its inclusion was perplexing before the game came out, and despite the fact that this is still my preferred version of the three, I still find that point to be true. I don't think this course stands out nearly enough to justify coming back to it again in this spot, and I don't think that it really makes the game better. And of course, it would be easy to make blanket statements like this based upon my personal opinions for any track really, but as any seasoned rookie watcher will surely know, on this channel we understand that when we make a critique, we need to suggest what we would have done differently and why. It's pretty simple in this scenario though. Dry Ruins is of course out there still, awaiting its first non-tour remake, and not only has it been used less, it is simply more popular than Desert Hills and a track that balances driving and item use more effectively in my mind. Given that the world already covers the desert theme, I feel as if the desert track would stand out more if it had a true landmark attached to it too, and that is where the ruins could have stood out. The game has very few indoor sections as is, and the ruins would provide more balance in that regard too. So swapping in ruins for Desert Hills and replacing one of the other Wii tracks to do so could have acted as a way to help not repeat multiple courses from the same game in the same cup as well, and that was a pattern that I'm not sure needed to be broken here. But crazily enough, that's still only the second option I'd go for. Personally, I would have replaced Desert Hills with Super Circuit's Yoshi Desert. And while the Wii fans might not agree and say that Dry Ruins is more interesting, I am just looking at the logistics here. The game has 0 Yoshi themed tracks, the game has 0 GBA tracks in general, and that just feels kinda wrong, and its theming feels like a nearly one-to-one match of Desert Hills anyway. I feel as if the game would almost be identical had the swap out happened, with better retro balancing and more tracks that had never returned up to this point. And instead of the DS tracks inexplicably getting 3 returning courses, now every game would hypothetically at least have some representation, assuming that you count Sky High Sunday as Mario Kart 8's track, and also with no game getting more than 2 courses. It would make so much sense, and I just cannot fathom why this imbalance exists for Desert Hills of all things. So when it comes to game fit, yeah, I understand why it works, but there were definitely other options and better ones at that would have served the same exact purpose with the world. The track ending up being better than I expected does alleviate some of the pain to me. It's not a bottom 5 track in the game in my mind, and it felt like a strong contender for that title before the game released, but still, not bottom 5 is still plenty far from being straight up good or a preferred option. Both Dry Ruins and Yoshi Desert wouldn't have even had to improve for me to have them higher up in my rankings, I believe. So with all things considered, my grade for Desert Hills is a D. This will not be the worst grade I hand out in this series, and I assure you I'm not some hater, but when I ask myself, What all does this track add to the game? I just don't feel like I have many answers to that question. While Desert Hills did not feel like a very rational retro pick for the game, I think Shy Guy Bazaar was possibly the single most logical retro track addition. It is an extension of the desert portion of the map, but it has a personality that extends beyond its desert theming. When taking the world map into consideration, tracks like this make the world feel more believable and deliberate. There's a reason for the free roam NPCs to drive into this corner of the map because there's a market over here. And off the top of my head, I can't think of any better courses in the series to fit this role in the desert. I don't exactly know how long World was in development, but I imagine Nintendo definitely had some outlines of this map and how it was all going to fit together, even dating back into the Booster Pass era. And as someone who made plenty of videos about the Booster Pass, I always considered this track as one that would be a great fit for it, and I found it kind of surprising that they passed it up. But with World out now, things make a lot more sense. But going beyond the theme of Mario Kart World, it's worth mentioning that this track would have been a slam dunk selection had the old formula of the series remained intact. Shy Guy Bazaar is definitely one of Mario Kart 7's more popular tracks, especially if you remove the 3DS courses that appeared in Mario Kart 8 from the equation. And it is a track that definitely could have spiced up some of the easier Retro Cups too. But to be fair though, I think this track also probably would have fit pretty well into any Mario Kart game for that matter. Still, I think I am glad that they put it here. Besides just being a great fit for the world, it takes advantage of all of this game's new mechanics too. I am aware that many competitive Mario Kart 7 players consider this track to be one of the crown jewels of their game, but up to this point I've enjoyed it quite a bit more in World. In Mario Kart 7, I think if I had any gripes, it was just that the course did not feel super flexible when it came to your options. Top paths existed in the market section back in 7, but they felt very slow to access. Additionally, there was a long string of coins in the fastest racing line down low too, in a game where coins were not just more effective, but took ages to respawn comparatively to 8 in World. It felt like throwing to not want to take them, and first place often just got to hog them for themselves. And frankly, I felt like there was just less space to work with here as well. Even if the coins were taken, the fastest path still remained, and it was a pretty narrow path, and the meta combos of Mario Kart 7 were massive in comparison to World, with turns that were as tight as ever. Stars were also completely overpowered in that game too, and some of these sections could just lead you to some disasters if you weren't the lucky recipient of one. With glider target shocking as well, it made a common shock spot perhaps a little bit too obvious at times as well. So maybe I'll be unpopular with some people for saying this, but I just did not love this track in that game. I certainly didn't hate it, but I found it to be a little bit plain and a little bit overrated. There were certainly tracks with more sins than this one, but there also was just not a lot that made me really excited to play it. That is kind of different now for me. The rails to the right of the start line provide an alternate path that is risky, not exactly game-breaking, but still fast. There are other alternative strats if you drive up there and some risky shortcuts to go for that I'm still in the process of trying to learn, and even in the final section leading up to the glider, I kind of like getting to choose between relative safety and some extra speed, making your decision to stay on the main road or the rails over to the left an impactful one. I feel like I have many different ways to approach the ending of races here for this reason, even if the last set shock that sometimes still happens can be quite devastating. This is a great example of a track where the rails make you consider your options. Very often I do feel as if there are reasons to not go for the fastest strategies, and while this can just be because I'm not yet consistent enough at them, it could also just be that I don't have enough space or safety around me when I'm approaching them. But what's also nice is that I don't feel like I'm frequently giving up on my race by not taking them too. Usually the alternative is not much slower here, so this is an example of a track that does the rail concept justice in my opinion. The sharp turns in the middle of the track take great advantage of wall tapping, a strategy that I honestly enjoy situationally. I don't like the idea that it's a strategy that you can use to like kind of be a crutch for bad driving, but I do like it when it can actually be faster if done deliberately. And in the case of this middle section, it makes it feel a little bit more manageable, especially in the particularly hectic moments near the item set. It feels like sometimes I have an extra out or I can take a different line a specific way, knowing that I can improvise with the wall to make it out unscathed. And sections like this are also part of the reason why lightweight characters feel so essential for the online metagame too, and personally I think that's a good thing. Extra handling usually means more player control, and this game could definitely use any extra control it can get, since it doesn't have the looser feel of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Bazaar is still not one of my favorite courses. I've just never really found it to be a super exciting design. Back in the 7 era, my team always had an internal war about what the best 3DS track was, this or Music Park. Both were really good runners in that game, with Bazaar being a more realistic themed course that rewarded players with great driving fundamentals, And in many ways, it was a measuring stick type of track for how good you actually were at Mario Kart 7. Music Park, though, was much more abstract, with a focus on rewarding the players that practiced the strategies that were specific to it. I was kind of the lead spokesperson for Team Music Park. To me, it was just more creative and lively, and I enjoyed learning all the little things that made the track stand out, regardless of its difficulty. But now that the script has flipped, some of my pals from back in the day had a few laughs after the World trailer dropped, and now that their track is finally back, with no Music Park in sight. I of course joked that they had to give the better course 11 years of priority first, but I am more than happy to change things up right now. And this is because Bazaar is objectively just a pretty quality track. It has a little bit of everything, solid theming, good racing lines, and there's strategy. So while not my personal favorite or one that I actively pick for myself, I can see that it is absolutely a quality addition and a track that I'm always down to see whenever it comes up in matches. This is a grade A selection and fit, where adding any other reasonable track in its place likely decreases the overall quality of the game. Good work here. Okay, wow. This was completely unexpected, and I say that as someone who was expecting to see this track in this game for over a decade. Wario Stadium has been the lone N64 track to never return to the series since the day Mario Kart 8 launched. At the time, it felt kinda strange. They seemingly brought back everything possible from Mario Kart 64 to 8 except for this track, even including its DS counterpart, and it got to the point where I had to sit and wonder if this all was deliberate. The reason why I questioned it was because I was not sure if Nintendo even had the confidence that they could save this course. It was essentially just a bunch of repetition with a 4-minute runtime. The ramp gimmick wore off faster than all the Wario faces spammed across the outside wall. Kind of like I said last episode regarding Calamari Desert, it was easy to feel that this was not a 21st century track. It was too long, but not long enough to become a one-lap track like N64 Rainbow Road was in Mario Kart 8, let alone memorable enough. And yet, despite these questions, it was still the most mocked track to the hypothetical Mario Kart 9 over the last decade. Even despite it never appearing in the DLC packs of Mario Kart 8, and the precedent being established that retro tracks could be repeated multiple times now, many still had belief that this course had to complete the N64 track remake arc eventually. And now, it has done just that. Even had this actually been a surprising selection, the true surprise was still always going to be how much of a slam dunk fit it ended up being. Now, due to how long the gap between 8 and World was, it's hard to theorize that they knew what World was going to be like and that they just wanted to save it for this game. Maybe they did exclude it from Mario Kart 8 with the intention of saving it for a better fitting game, and perhaps they just never wanted to have two Wario Stadiums in the same game, and that's why it never returned as a DLC track. But maybe they felt that anti-gravity wasn't going to be a transformative feature for the track. Whatever the decision was though, I think it was all for the better. This track fits so naturally into World that it kinda just feels that this was always the original idea and intent. It feels like they knew that wall riding and rails were going to be World's gimmick a whole decade ago. And I know this is incredibly unlikely in actuality, but I have the thought because this seemingly once outdated track probably implemented these new mechanics better than any other retro track the game has to offer. The fastest paths around the track take full advantage of the mechanics, but they're also quite difficult to pull off and take a little bit of work to get them down optimally. The idea that one of the corner cuts is so precise that it practically requires you to grab a coin out of your charge jump is insane, and it creates an interesting dynamic where you might have to time a coin respawn to hit a shortcut if you're behind another player, or maybe you might even abandon the cut setup entirely to steal the coin from someone right in front of you who might be trying to break away. But I think the fortunate part of the rails in this track is that there's often plenty of reason to not take them as well. The rails at the beginning of the lap steer you away from the opening item set and aren't a game-breaking amount faster. They seem to be there as a risky but speedier option that can set up early leads, but rarely have I ever felt like my race has just ended from not taking them, which I can't actually say about taking them. The left rail in the middle of the lap is not particularly fast, but also provides a bunch of coins up top, and staying grounded in this section still has a shroom spot ahead of the final item set, allowing you to at least kind of keep pace if the right rail strat is too risky of a situation for you. Now, the world and free roam were the main intentions of all these new features and mechanics, I believe, but the overworld can really only do so much with them. The strategies that you see fully on display in Wario Stadium aren't really things that can be fully replicated in your connector courses or knockout tours, just on the premise that non-circuit road designs don't really have many turns that have to loop back for a lap too. Of course, it's technically possible that they could have implemented more interesting rail sections in a lot of these connector tracks, but the point A to point B design of many of them makes it harder to see this as necessary. What you end up getting are a bunch of bridges and power lines where it's almost always slower to take those rails. Going upward pushes some of your momentum upward instead of forward too and locks you into a line, and that line is rarely ever going to be tighter than the main road in those sections. Wario Stadium justifies these new mechanics in my opinion, and this is the best possible outcome. Initially, I saw many players were irritated that the track's layout wasn't one-to-one with the original version. Some of you all got flashbacks to Sunset Wilds and Sky Garden with this one initially. But the thing is, change is not inherently a bad thing, it's just sometimes it can be. But in this case, I'd say the track just lost some unnecessary weight. The track is still 3 laps, all of the most important sections were maintained in my opinion, and the course feels less repetitive for that reason. Every section is pretty memorable, I'd say, and has fun strats to pull off. It is not only a good time, but it no longer overstays its welcome. And what you get with all of these factors put together is a strong runner with a multitude of options at your disposal every lap that greatly utilizes the new mechanics, adds variety to the game, is a very logical fit in both the world and this Flower Cup in particular, all out of an overdue track to return whose expectations weren't even that high to begin with. And I think that's everything that you could possibly want out of a track remake. The grade is a clear A+. It is hard to envision how they could do any better here, with all factors considered. If I had one complaint, it's that the ending section can be a little claustrophobic given the game's engine, with a last turn shortcut that probably saves a little bit too much time, but I can't say that this cut turns the track into something degenerate in the least bit. This track isn't my favorite in the game by any means, but it is one that I now like a lot, that I always have wanted to like. When I was a young karter, I was a big fan of all the stadium tracks and all their big jumps. They were just cool to me, and I loved this track initially for that reason. It almost felt like a bigger version of the DS one that I had played first, actually. It wasn't until I got older and had some more frontal lobe development that I began to question if, well, maybe I was overrating it. I'll just say the DS one is definitely my preference now. But this makes sitting here recording this today kinda cool for me, because I'm glad to say that I can shamelessly enjoy this track once again, where the more analytical side of me just agrees with the emotional side. The satisfying tricks off the walls in the first section as opposed to just driving over a few ramps hits so much different with the context of what the track used to be, and I feel that if they can revamp this one so successfully, perhaps they won't ever give up on any course down the road. Figure 8 circuit, the bar just got higher. I'm expecting great things out of you down the road. Don't disappoint. When it comes to grades or ranking videos, I really try not to be swayed by public opinion. It does not bother me in the least bit if someone complains about me listing Mushroom Gorge as a bottom 20 track in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, because that is just my honest-to-God opinion. I felt no pressure to place tracks like Mount Wario or Big Blue in my AT top 5 because I just don't see fan-favorite tracks as courses that need to be in everybody's top 5. I just don't think that that's how the world works, and I think that's a good thing, because if everyone had the same opinions, the world would just be a more boring place. To me, fan-favorite tracks are simply the ones that are going to be rated higher on average than the rest. A top 5 track according to fans does not mean that the track should be expected to be in the majority or even many of top 5s to begin with. All it means is that it's more likely to be in the average person's top 5 than the average track. Just every track individually is probably pretty unlikely to be in everybody's top 5 because people can choose between 96 courses in the context of 8D. For instance, I think I rated Wii Rainbow Road as my 15th favorite track in that game, solidly in my A tier, and because so many others rated highly, I feel like me giving it a high mark definitely contributes to its status as a fan favorite. Yet weirdly, some fans might look at this ranking and think the opposite, or that I'm actually underrating it due to its status as a universally loved track. What you get is this weird phenomenon where every consensus top tier course is likely lower on your own personal list, so long as you don't let the consensus opinion speak for you, that is, and sometimes this is just a weird thing for people to wrap their head around. So yeah, I think it is pretty normal for people to have a list where there are a bunch of surprises in the top 5. I think people are more likely to be telling the truth if their list actually doesn't look like most of the others. But of course, this doesn't mean that an honest list can't contain any of the fan favorites either, and if your top 5 does contain one of these fan favorite tracks, it actually has an interesting effect. And this is likely because everyone else is going to probably find the course to be slightly overrated, and you're going to be out here defending it in discussions where it's pitted against other tracks you find to be slightly overrated too. This was always funny to me in 8 Deluxe because I felt like I defended Waluigi Pinball being my favorite track much more frequently than I had to defend Riverside Park being in my top 10, when rationally speaking one of these opinions should definitely be more controversial than the other. But when it comes to Mario Kart World though, Airship Fortress is the fan favorite course that does actually live up to all the hype for me. It is the one that I anticipate I'll be defending against the overrated allegations with time. And I'm okay with that because there's a lot to love here. I think this is probably forever going to be my favorite main series crossover track. Coming from Mario Kart DS, a game filled with these kinds of courses, it felt like the best of the bunch. To me, the airship levels in Mario 3 always stood out as the most memorable levels in that game, and the intense feelings of them can definitely be felt in this track without the burden of any auto-scrolling as well. I've noticed that a lot of people have critiqued this track before for not having any major shortcuts. To me, this has always worked in the track's favor though. It still had open areas to balance the sections with sharp turns and narrow paths or a bunch of obstacles. Mario Kart 7 added the sidewalls in the opening section that allowed for a riskier but slightly faster alternative line, and there was plenty of interactivity here in my eyes and plenty of room for skills to take over. I don't think the track needed shortcuts for this reason. I found it already satisfying to play, and adding a shortcut or two might only serve to undermine its strength as a course that just begs you to play it from the front. And as a Wario Coliseum and Waluigi Pinball fan, and considering that Airship Fortress has now become my favorite course on 3 of the last 5 Mario Karts, I think it's safe to say that I don't mind having tracks without any shroom cuts. I very much value clever ideas and fun track layouts where seemingly the only thing that can stop me from taking over is my own driving error. Interestingly though, Mario Kart World's version of Airship Fortress went ahead and added some shortcuts. One of them was a last turn shroom cut, something that would ordinarily be a tragic thing to me. But believe it or not, I think that these shortcuts were awesome. Especially the shroom cut, actually. This is not just because they look cool or are satisfying to pull off, it is that on top of those facts, these cuts do not break the track's identity as a hard runner. Debatably, they even enhance it. These shortcuts were in some ways an extension of the ridges they added to the Mario Kart 7 version at the beginning of the track. The top of these walls now have been replaced to rail grinding sections, and I've got to say, I think it works pretty well. The first 2 turns being a quick left and right in succession add a lot here. It makes both the left and right rail the tightest line at different points that are still close enough together to justify rail hopping across the entire track as a mini shortcut. And this cut can be performed shroomless every lap and leads you up to the entry gate of the airship. The whole sequence is so fast too, and lands you right on a tight red rail that offers more trick opportunities on its turns to maintain the speed. This part is incredibly satisfying to pull off, and its placement at the beginning of the track is much preferred to having it at the end. As mentioned last time, rails can lead to some dangerous track designs at times, and the potential for time loss if disrupted in the section can be substantial. But with this track being a bit of a breakaway runner, and these strats not being at the very end of the course where everything's really compact on lap 3, there is fortunately enough space to often take the rail here, and when there isn't, it's not going to be immediately race ending under the majority of circumstances. And the last shortcut is actually one of my favorites in the game. The starting rail on the left does extend past the start-finish line to the point where it can be reached with a mushroom plus charge hop, and this one saves a solid chunk of time and feels amazing to hit as it sets you up for the next lap or a fast ending. And I don't find it to be detrimental to the track for many reasons. One, this cut isn't really optimal for golden mushroom users or bagging players, as the tower right before is a bad section for goldens, but if you start goldening as you do it, it's going to end at a section where you don't really want to keep spamming it because of the aforementioned cut at the beginning of the lap that can go disastrously with too much speed. Using a bill once up on the rail will also keep you on the left path where it's immediately slower once the first turn ends and goes into the right turn immediately. And 2, the off-road before the cuts plays perfectly. There is just enough that it discourages anyone from finding strats to get up there shroomless, which could lead to a bunch of shells or bananas being tossed on it, while still being small enough to not be like some super fast shroom cut if taken a safer way at the very end of the track. In other words, I think this cut is quite satisfying, and I don't find that it disrupts the flow of the race. I think it is just a great tool for pack players to make up some time or to make a push for first at the end of lap 1 or even at the end of lap 3. And maybe I'm alone in this, but I've also always loved the tower on this track. The longer turns in the series always have been an adrenaline rush to me, and like with Guy Bazaar, the singular wall taps that you can do in World on turns like the tower allow you to go so incredibly tight that it makes me even sadder that Wario Coliseum and its 720-degree spiral weren't added to this engine as well. These sections can be criticized as they are blind spots to backed items, but there is just almost no feeling I enjoy more than hitting a perfect tower with a perfectly timed exit into the ending shortcut. And with the new strats at the beginning on top of it, all I can say is this: the track is so fun to drive. And to me, that is the most important thing that this course has consistently gotten right for decades now. This is why it'll always be the wildly popular course that I'll never have an issue placing in my S tier, seemingly no matter what game it is. And because it always ends up being a hard runner, you can often play it relatively safe in this tower section anyway. Seeing it return again was so exciting for me. When they dumped the entire game on us back in the April Switch 2 Direct, I had no idea what to think initially. I was overloaded with information. I didn't know what the connector courses even were yet, so my brain was broken trying to comprehend what was happening. I saw DK Pass and Wario Stadium, but they looked so modern that I didn't even recognize them until later rewatches. And I always found myself to be an incredibly observant trailer watcher back in the Wii U era of Mario Kart 8, but minutes in, I still really had no idea if there were even returning courses here or if it was all new. So many tracks just looked completely different than the others, and I didn't have the answers yet. But then I eventually saw the majestic floating airship looking better than ever. Finally in a quality that was no longer confined to what a handheld device could handle. And after that moment, I at least knew one thing. Peak had returned, and I could now begin to make sense of all the chaos.
Retro Tracks is done, or am I just not able to like see anything?
To this vast world.
Like that looks like Moo Moo Meadows, right? But I don't think it was. Oh my god, is that Airship Fortress?
Depending on the time of day and weather conditions, the atmosphere
Dude,
will change.
that was Airship Fortress.
Of course, this wasn't an entirely perfect showing. The track can feel claustrophobic at times, and I understand how some still might not like the rail section on it. At the beginning of the course, it is pretty extensive, and even though the right rail is usable too, and even good for players starting in first place, an overwhelming amount of focus can be concentrated on the main line at times, making traps quite tough to avoid. To some players, they might feel that their race ends prematurely due to the inability to break through early on quite often, and I empathize with that. And I admit, as players improve, I myself have questions about how sustainable the front-running fun will be for me as well. But up to this point, I have not hit that wall yet. I'm having a blast, and feel that like Pinball and 8 Deluxe, the small decisions that I am making to get to the front are so impactful in my success. It is not shortcuts that help on tracks like these, but moments of game sense. I feel that when I am not up front here, the optimal play is not to just hard bag, but to win a series of one-on-one interactions. It makes the successful comeback feel all the better and truly earned. Now, for many years, I have actually considered Airship Fortress to be my second favorite track in the entire Mario Kart series. And while my opinions do change over time, as it stands, it has now been my favorite track in a game 3 different times now when no other course has been that more than once. But oddly, despite it being my favorite in the world, I do think that definitively I'm probably going to drop it down to number 3 the next time I make my list. Below Waluigi Pinball actually, a track that it shared a game with twice. It almost feels like a contradiction after ranking at number 1 again, but I do have my reasons, and mainly it is just that while I love the driving on this course, it's just how you interact with your opponents can sometimes be a little bit frustrating. Obviously, everybody wants to get on the rail at the beginning of lap 1, and a lot of people immediately push each other off the track as a result of it. And I rarely engage with the left rail early on in races these days, and it works better for me, but I have been part of my fair share of degenerate interactions. And while there is definitely counterplay to players who trap these rails on subsequent laps, there have been moments where I felt that I was simply unable to react. In some ways, auto-trailing items like bananas and greens is a good thing here because when others do it, it can at least alert you to the threat or allow you to dispose of it. Not every item is going to hit you either on these rails because you do have the option to jump, especially at certain junctures where you expect a banana to come back at you. But while that does sound nice, in practice the speed of the green shell is lightning fast. And I do feel that perhaps if it matched its speed from Wii, that perhaps rails would be a little bit more manageable in certain interactions. But as it stands, I often find myself wanting to throw up a green shell just to potentially protect myself if someone's in front of me. I do think this counterplay matters because I have seen pretty good results here. A matter of fact, I do think that there is something to enjoying a track that perhaps simply makes you play better on it too. I feel as if you are more likely to pick up on the little details and just naturally understand how to win on tracks that you like more and thus probably play more, whether that be through your own track picks or just in time trials. Comparatively speaking though, I felt that Pinball just allowed more space to operate back in 8 Deluxe. It felt like you had slightly more control in your comebacks, and admittedly, it's also harder to be number 1 in 96 instead of number 1 of 30 or 32, so I did want to make this distinction, and that's because it feels like at times, ranking something number 1 makes people inherently think that you see no flaws with it, and I do see some negatives. There's just not enough for me to want to displace it from the top of my list and world. But anyway, this is enough of the negatives talk. Unlike with Desert Hills, I think this is the exact type of track you want to see getting multiple opportunities to return even. Every time I get this track in a new engine, it just feels like a big bonus for a game, especially when considering that there's just no guarantee that it was ever going to return after Mario Kart 7. And while it might seem like an obvious selection now, there was a time just a few years back where the community was genuinely shocked that it was not returning in the Booster Pass. The Booster Pass seems like the most logical opportunity for fan favorites to return a second time, and we had no clue then if repeat retros were on the table for the next game, but given what we know now, I am glad that things played out this way, and I guess I'm just going to have to learn to trust the process from here on out. Because here's the thing, Airship Fortress is better in World than it would have been in 8 Deluxe. What made it such a slam dunk pick for this game was not its popularity or that it's one of the most innovative tracks that the series has ever produced. It's not just that it's a perfect crossover track with its airship level theming seen all throughout the main series. It's that specifically this type of stage seamlessly fits into what Mario Kart World is attempting to even do. It fits the world, it fits the mechanics. In a game like this, a retro Bowser's Castle never really seemed like something that was going to be on the table because the new Bowser's Castle fit the world already. But every Mario 3 world didn't just have a castle, it had an airship level too. So placing a track like this nearby is about as easy of a decision as you can make. Not only does it fit and implement the new mechanics superbly, but it brings back one of the best possible retro tracks that they could have selected, regardless of whether or not there was a world or there wasn't. It's certainly not perfect, nor is it a track that hasn't had its opportunities before, but I can't come up with a better option to have in its place. It certainly makes this game better. Grade A. The only true knock I can give it is that other courses have been waiting for longer, but not many other courses could have fit the bill in quite the same way. Alright guys, let's wrap up. I kind of hate to do this for the second episode in a row in part 2 of a series, but this is again an outstanding cup and probably my favorite Flower Cup of all time. I will say the race is closer this time as I really love the DS Flower Cup as well, but ironically enough, I can't really give that one the edge because it also has Desert Hills starting it off as a bit of a weak link. Overall, I think the DS Cup might be a little bit more top heavy for me, but this one seems more consistent throughout. Now, I would say that Bazaar and Stadium aren't really up in my top tier, but they are undoubtedly perfect selections and ones I plan to both give higher grades than Airship Fortress initially, despite it being in that top tier for me. Ultimately, I decided against this because as I was typing, I just felt more and more convinced that Airship Fortress was a track that was completely justified in returning again, given what World sets out to do, and I think that more than any cup in this game, the Flower Cup best represents the goals of the game. All 4 tracks feel like perfect fits that are interesting in the desert portion of the map, and desert worlds can sometimes be a little bit dry, I suppose. Get it? Anyway, the gritty sands along the roads connecting these courses feel fitting, and certainly not out of place, and yet each of the 4 tracks are quite distinct from each other. While the Mushroom Cup ended up being my favorite Mushroom Cup ever too, that was more of a formality due to the relatively weak nature of prior Mushroom Cups. This Flower Cup though is up there with my favorite cups of all time, and perhaps a better selection for its opening track could have put it in legitimate discussions for my favorite ever, but hey, there's no shame in being really good. I promise that down the road we will at least take a little bit of a step back. Not everything's going to be my favorite cup ever, but that'll come when I find it warranted. For now, I'll just say that I hope you enjoyed this one, and make sure to let me know what you think of this cup too. See you all next time, and thanks for watching.